Hi, welcome to Conflict Story, where we bring you the best and most fascinating stories just for you. Let's dive right into one of those stories. It begins like this.
On a serene Sunday afternoon, my life took an unexpected twist. I'd been lounging in my apartment in Austin, Texas, devouring episodes of a gripping crime thriller and deliberating between barbecue or tacos for dinner. The day seemed perfect until an unexpected encounter shattered my tranquility. The chime of the doorbell jolted me out of my cozy cocoon. Expecting a package or perhaps a neighbor with a mundane request, I shuffled to the door. But standing on my doorstep was someone I'd never seen before. A woman in her early 50s with impeccably styled silver blonde hair and an air of sharp authority. Her posture radiated impatience, her arms crossed as if she had been waiting for far too long. "Finally," she snapped, her tone sharp enough to cut through the warm Texan breeze. "I was beginning to think no one was home." Bewildered, I replied, "Can I help you?" She thrust out a manicured hand. "Karen Sullivan, I'm here to claim my property." I blinked, dumbfounded. I I think you have the wrong place. This is my apartment." Karen's eyes narrowed, her voice rising with indignation. "Don't play dumb. I've been tracking this unit for weeks. I bought it, and now I'm here to take possession." I couldn't suppress a laugh, though it did little to ease the tension. "I'm sorry, but I've lived here for over a year. I pay rent. I think you've been misinformed." Her face turned crimson. "Misinformed? I've got the deed right here." From her oversized tote bag, she retrieved a document, thrusting it at me as if it were a winning lottery ticket. I glanced at the paper. It didn't take an expert to notice the inconsistencies. A low-resolution logo, vague descriptions, and glaring grammatical errors. This wasn't a deed, it was a counterfeit. "Ma'am, this isn't legitimate," I said cautiously. "You've been scammed." Karen's voice escalated. "Scammed? You're the one squatting in my apartment. I'm calling the police." As she fumbled for her phone, I realized this situation was escalating rapidly. While Karen dialed, I decided to do the same. Within minutes, the calm neighborhood was disrupted by the arrival of two patrol cars. Officers emerged, their expressions a mix of curiosity and exasperation. Karen wasted no time launching into a dramatic tirade. "This man is trespassing on my property. I have the deed to prove it." One officer, a tall man with a Texan drawl named Officer Daniels, turned to me. "Sir, what's your side of the story?" I recounted the events, presenting my rental agreement and correspondence with the property manager. Daniels examined my papers, then scrutinized Karen's supposed deed. His brow furrowed as he pointed out its flaws. "Ma'am, this document is fraudulent," he said firmly. "This apartment is under a legitimate lease agreement with Mr. Peterson here." Karen's defiance faltered. Her shoulders slumped and her voice wavered. "But I wired all my savings to that realtor. They said it was a quick sale." Officer Daniels softened. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It appears you've been the victim of a scam. We'll file a report and do what we can to investigate, but recovery in these cases is rare." Karen's indignation crumbled into despair. Tears welled up as she whispered, "I've lost everything." Despite the chaos she had caused, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. "Listen," I said, surprising even myself. "Why don't you come inside, have some water, and we can figure out what to do next?" Karen hesitated, her pride battling with her vulnerability. Finally, she nodded. The officers lingered to take statements while I led Karen into my modest living room. Offering her a glass of water, I said, "We'll figure this out together." In that moment, a tentative truce formed between us, setting the stage for an unlikely alliance that neither of us could have anticipated. As Karen sat on my couch, nervously sipping her water, the tension in the room was palpable. Her earlier confidence had crumbled, replaced by a quiet despair. The stark reality of her situation was clearly sinking in, and I could see the struggle etched on her face. "I just don't understand how this happened," she said, her voice trembling. "Everything looks so legitimate. The website, the emails, the agent. They even sent me photos of this place. Scammers are good at what they do," I said gently. "They prey on people who are vulnerable or looking for a great deal. It's not your fault." Karen's hands shook slightly as she set the glass down on the coffee table. "But what do I do now? I sold my old home to afford this. I don't have anywhere else to go." I felt a pang of guilt. Sure, Karen had come in like a storm, accusing me of stealing her non-existent property. But seeing her like this, defeated and lost, was hard to ignore. Look, I began, choosing my words carefully. You can stay here tonight. We'll figure out the next steps tomorrow. I can help you report this to the authorities and maybe find some resources that can assist you. Karen looked at me with a mix of gratitude and hesitation. Are you sure? After the way I barged in here? It's fine, I assured her. Besides, the couch is pretty comfortable. You'll be okay for a night. She nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Thank you. I don't know what else to say. You don't need to say anything right now, I replied. Let's just take it one step at a time. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee brewing. Karen was in the kitchen, wearing an old hoodie I'd lent her, and meticulously cleaning the counter. It was almost as if she needed the routine to ground herself after the chaos of the previous day. Morning, I said, stretching as I entered the room. Good morning, she replied, her tone tentative but polite. I hope you don't mind. I found the coffee maker and thought I'd make a pot. Not at all, I said with a small smile. Thanks. We sat at the small dining table, the awkwardness between us slowly dissipating. Karen's composure had returned somewhat, and she seemed eager to tackle the situation head-on. So what's the plan? She asked, stirring sugar into her coffee. First, we'll report the scam to the authorities, I said. Officer Daniels mentioned last night that they could help you file a report. From there, we'll see what resources are available. Maybe there are support groups or charities that assist scam victims. Karen nodded thoughtfully. That sounds like a good start. I hate to impose, but would you mind coming with me? I'm not sure I can do this alone. Of course, I said without hesitation. We'll figure it out together. Later that day, we found ourselves at the local police station. Karen clutched a folder containing all the documents and emails related to the scam. Officer Daniels met us at the front desk and escorted us to a quiet office where we could go over the details. This is more common than you might think, he said after hearing Karen's story. These scammers often operate internationally, making it hard to track them down. But we'll do everything we can to investigate. Karen nodded, her grip tightening on the folder. Thank you, officer. I can't believe I was so foolish. You're not foolish, Daniel said kindly. These people are professionals. They know exactly how to manipulate their victims. The important thing now is to focus on moving forward. By the time we left the station, Karen seemed lighter, as though the act of sharing her story had lifted some of the burden from her shoulders. Still, the uncertainty of her future loomed large. What now? She asked as we walked to my car. I thought for a moment. Let's take it step by step. You've got a roof over your head for now. Tomorrow we'll start looking for more permanent solutions. Maybe even a job if that's something you're up for. Karen offered a small smile. Thank you, Mike. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. I shrugged. Let's just focus on getting you back on your feet. That's repayment enough. For the first time since she had arrived, Karen's smile reached her eyes. It was a small victory, but in that moment, it felt like the start of something hopeful. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity as Karen and I worked to rebuild her life. True to her word, she dove into every task with a determination that was both admirable and heartbreaking. Each morning, she would wake early, scouring job boards and community forums on my old laptop, while I went about my usual routine. One afternoon, as I returned home from work, I found Karen in the living room surrounded by papers. A triumphant smile lit up her face. I got an interview, she announced, holding up her phone like it was a trophy. That's amazing, I said, genuinely happy for her. What's the job? Administrative assistant at a local nonprofit, she replied. It's not much, but it's a start. They focus on helping underserved communities, and I think it'll be meaningful work. Sounds perfect, Manon, I said. Let me know if you need help preparing. You've got this. Karen's confidence grew in the days leading up to the interview. We rehearsed potential questions, updated her resume, and even picked out an outfit from a local thrift store. When the day finally arrived, she left the apartment with a nervous but determined look. I crossed my fingers, hoping for the best. That evening, Karen burst through the door, her face beaming. I got the job, she exclaimed, practically bouncing with excitement. That's incredible, I said, pulling her into a congratulatory hug. I knew you could do it. Thank you, Mike, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I couldn't have done it without you. The new job was a turning point for Karen. It gave her a sense of purpose and a steady income. But more than that, it reignited a spark in her that had been missing since the scam. She threw herself into the work, quickly earning the respect of her colleagues and making meaningful connections in the community. Meanwhile, I noticed something unexpected. Having Karen around was changing me too. My usually solitary life felt fuller, more vibrant. Even the small things like sharing dinner or watching TV together seemed to carry more weight. Karen's resilience was inspiring, and her laughter had a way of making even the worst days feel manageable. One evening, as we sat on the couch flipping through channels, Karen turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," she began, "about how I ended up here, about the scam. It's horrible, but it's also opened my eyes to something bigger." "What do you mean?" I asked, curious. "I've been meeting people at work who've gone through similar experiences," she explained. "Scams, fraud, losing everything. It's more common than I realized. I want to do something to help." "Like what?" "Maybe a support group," she said, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "A place where people can share their stories, get advice, and maybe even learn how to avoid scams in the future." I nodded, impressed. "That sounds like a fantastic idea. You've got the experience and the empathy to make it work." "Do you really think so?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Absolutely," I said. "And if you need help, I'm here. We can set up a website, print flyers, whatever you need." Karen smiled, her confidence growing. "Thank you, Mike. I mean it. You've been my rock through all of this." "Hey, it's the least I can do," I said with a grin. "Besides, I'm kind of invested in this whole Karen's comeback story now." Over the next few weeks, Karen threw herself into her new project with the same determination she had shown in rebuilding her life. She reached out to local organizations, secured a meeting space at the community center, and worked with me to create an online presence for the group. The first meeting of her support group, which she decided to call Scam Survivors United, was both nerve-wracking and exhilarating. A dozen people showed up, each with their own story of hardship and loss. Karen led the session with a mix of vulnerability and strength, sharing her own experience and encouraging others to do the same. By the end of the meeting, the room was buzzing with a sense of connection and hope. People exchanged numbers, shared resources, and made plans to meet again. Karen's face was glowing as we packed up the chairs and headed home. "That was incredible," she said, her voice filled with awe. "I didn't realize how much people needed this." "You did great," I said. "This is just the beginning." As we drove home, I couldn't help but marvel at how far Karen had come. What had started as a nightmare had become an opportunity to not only rebuild her life, but to help others do the same. It was inspiring to witness, and I felt a deep sense of pride in her accomplishments. Little did we know, the biggest challenges and triumphs were still ahead. As Karen's support group, Scam Survivors United, grew in popularity, so did her confidence. What started as a small gathering of people sharing stories soon transformed into a full-fledged community initiative. Meetings were held weekly, both in person and online, drawing participants from across the country. Karen's resilience and empathy turned her into a local figure of hope and determination. But with success came challenges. One evening, Karen came home visibly shaken, clutching her bag tightly. She set it on the counter with a thud and took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "What happened?" I asked, concern etched on my face. Karen hesitated, then pulled out a letter from her bag. "It's from the scammers," she said, her voice trembling. "They sent me a threat." I quickly scanned the letter. It was vague but menacing, warning her to stop meddling or face serious consequences. My chest tightened with anger. "They're trying to intimidate you," I said firmly. "You've been making waves and they don't like it. But we won't let them scare us." Karen nodded, though her hands still shook. "I'm not going to stop, Mike. I've worked too hard to back down now. People need this group. And you're not alone in this," I said. "We'll report this to the authorities, and I'll help you beef up security for the group." Together, we took the letter to Officer Daniels, who assured us that the police would investigate. In the meantime, I worked on strengthening the group's online presence, adding encryption and better safeguards to protect the participants' privacy. Karen, undeterred, used the threat as fuel for her mission, warning others about the lengths scammers would go to silence their victims. The tension reached a boiling point during one of the group's largest meetings yet. Held at the community center, the event had drawn nearly 50 attendees, including media and local officials. Karen stood at the front of the room, speaking passionately about her journey and the importance of vigilance. "We're not just survivors," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "We're fighters. Together we can stand against these predators and take back our power." The crowd erupted into applause, but the moment was interrupted when a man in the back of the room stood up, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. "You're wasting your time," he called out, his voice dripping with disdain. "These people don't care about you. They just want to take your money again." The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at the man. Karen, unfazed, met his gaze head-on. "If you have something to say, sir," she said calmly, "why don't you come up here and say it?" The man hesitated, then turned and stormed out of the room. The atmosphere was tense, but Karen quickly regained control, urging the attendees to focus on their shared goals. Later, Officer Daniels, who had been quietly observing the meeting, approached Karen. "We'll look into that," he said. "Could be nothing, but it's better to be cautious." Despite the threats and occasional disruptions, Karen's determination never wavered. Over time, the group's influence grew, attracting attention from national advocacy organizations. Karen was invited to speak at conferences, share her story on podcasts, and even contribute to policy discussions aimed at combating online fraud. But the real victory came one sunny afternoon when Karen received a call from Officer Daniels. The scammers who had stolen her money and countless others had been apprehended in a coordinated international operation. While recovering the stolen funds would take time, the news brought a sense of closure Karen had longed for. Tears streamed down her face as she hung up the phone. "We did it," she whispered, looking at me with a mixture of relief and joy. "We actually did it." Months later, Karen and I stood together on the porch, watching as a group of Scam Survivors United volunteers loaded supplies into a van for an outreach event. The organization had grown beyond anything we could have imagined, and Karen was at its heart, a symbol of resilience and hope. "You've come a long way," I said, smiling at her. "We've come a long way," she corrected, her eyes shining. "None of this would have been possible without you, Mike." "Hey, I just offered a couch," I joked. "You did all the hard work." Karen laughed, the sound light and free. "Maybe, but that couch changed my life." As we watched the van drive off, I felt a deep sense of pride, not just in Karen, but in what we'd built together. Life had thrown us both into an unexpected storm, but together we'd found our way to calmer waters. Sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most extraordinary journeys. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow.